and heavy. And you know, I don't really make serious videos, but I thought that maybe if someone else watching has recently lost someone, or you know, you feel like the anticipatory grief, maybe this will weirdly help someone, or maybe it will just make you feel even more depressed. So comment down below which one it does for you. But this is my first time experiencing loss with someone that I actually have memories with, and someone who I was, you know, used to being in my life. And you know, her passing away, it wasn't completely unexpected. You know, she was in her 80s and she had breast cancer, and as we all know, cancer can kill people. It's kind of its whole shtick. But it actually was still sort of unexpected because the chemo had been working. The chemo was doing its thing, right? And she ended up dying of a heart attack, which just feels like a bit of a sick joke or something, you know, like, actually the cancer's doing well, but there's a secret third thing that's around the, you know, like, okay. So, you know, we knew she was sick. Obviously, no one gets a cancer diagnosis and is like, this should be a good addition to the temple that is my body. But, you know, we just weren't expecting it to happen so soon, right? And, well, I know this video will feel really different and maybe it won't be for everyone, but I think that I'm selfishly maybe making this kind of more for myself and for my family, rather than for you guys. Not to exclude you guys from my family. We're all one big parasocial family, but you didn't know my grandmother, with all due respect. And you know, I guess since I don't frankly really have the motivation to be making funny, you know, the usual type of content that I make, I do feel motivated to commemorate, is commemorate the right word? Yes, to commemorate and appreciate my ama, and just, I want to make something for her. So yeah, I guess let me tell you about my ama. She had resting smile face, you know, even throughout the hair loss and the side effects of the treatments and stuff like that, she was still smiling. And everyone who knew her, you know, thought that she was very sweet and friendly and kind because she was. Her English was, you know, a little limited, and after she had a stroke a couple years ago, her communication started to deteriorate a little bit, but she always had this one catchphrase that I will definitely remember. She would always say, "That's a good one." In response to anything, I could say, "Ama, who's the president of the United States?" And she'd go, "That's a good one." She really liked to cook, and she was a great cook. You know, I remember when my sister and I would go over to their house a lot as kids, they would always make us food. You know, even when we weren't hungry, they would still give us food. She also really liked to garden. She had a really big garden in the backyard, and I remember in the spring and summer, rabbits would always eat the vegetables. My gonggong, who's my grandpa, was with my ama for about 60 years. They had 60 years of marriage, and they would, you know, go on walks together, go to the community center, and, you know, spend time at home together watching TV. The last couple months of her life, we would get K-pot a lot. And I remember, you know, all of us there sitting there as a family, and we would always be monitoring our grandparents' pots, right, and making sure that they had enough food. And I know a lot of people, you know, are filling their bowls before filling their own and stuff like that. And my ama and gonggong were, they're a little bit of picky eaters, and they really liked K-pot though. And there's like one of the few restaurants that they would come with us to. You know, they're not, you know, they're not exactly jumping out of their seat to go to Olive Garden. My mom also made sure that my ama, or her mom, was active and, you know, exercising still during, after her stroke and during the chemotherapy and stuff. So we would get up and we would walk in place while watching TV, or we would raise our arms up and down and kind of just march around the house. And we would dance too. She also really liked doing puzzles, doing coloring books, and playing mahjong on the iPad. She loved doing word searches, and she was really good at them too. I think after I found out that she was sick, I kind of realized the reality that because of the language barrier, we didn't know a lot about each other, to be honest. You know, I think that in her eyes, I was her granddaughter who, you know, she might not have known a lot of my passions or hobbies or, you know, things about me, like why I've been single for so long in their eyes, and, you know, things that I do for work. You know, for my grandparents, they're probably like, YouTube, what's a YouTube? You know, I think that they think I'm a writer, which technically I am. But ultimately, you know, they were always happy that I was happy. My gonggong asks me every time that I'm home, so how do you like New York? And I'm like, I love it. And he's like, you like your job? And I'm like, I love my job. So I don't think that this diminishes the love. I think that, you know, people can experience this with a lot of their family members. But yeah, I think that we only knew each other to a certain extent. And I really wanted to try and remedy that because I didn't know how much longer I would have that window of opportunity. So that's one of the reasons why I started to teach myself Mandarin, so that I could try to communicate with my grandparents a little better. So I would try to talk to her in Mandarin sometimes, but you know, I could only ask very surface level, preschool-esque type questions. You know, I wasn't asking, so what are your thoughts on the political, you know, stances between Taiwan and China? You know, it was things like, what's your favorite fruit? And even then, sometimes she wouldn't understand me, and then I would be like, damn, I guess my Mandarin really is that shitty. So then I would re-ask in English, but then she still wouldn't understand. So I think that it's kind of just the effects from after the stroke. Or maybe she just really didn't have a favorite fruit. Anyways, having been a nurse, I didn't have any problem, you know, bathing her, taking care of her, or dressing her wounds and stuff like that. I know a lot of people might not want to see their grandparents naked, but for me, it really doesn't bother me at all. I just wanted to take care of her. So I would help her take showers and, you know, assess her skin and stuff. And I just remember whenever I would be helping her get dressed, she loved to wear layers. It's like, damn girl, the clothes aren't going anywhere, you know? You don't have to put them all on at once. And my mom and I would be like, Ama, you're gonna get too hot. And my Ama would be like, well, frankly, that's none of your business. She was also really short. She was maybe around 4'10", I want to say. And we would always joke around that she was shrinking every year. And whenever we would hug, her head would be like at my chest. And it's weird because I can still feel what it feels like to give her a hug, right? Like I can feel the pressure on my chest and like the prickliness of her sweater, and you know, when I would be like patting her on the back and she would rub my back before I left to come back to my apartment here, right? And when someone dies and you're going through grief, it's like, well, am I going to forget that sensation? And I think that makes me really sad. You know, death is a singular event, but then grief is the constant reminder that that event happened. And it really sucks. And sometimes it will hit you out of nowhere. You know, like I could be randomly doing something, feeling relatively fine considering that my grandma just died, but you know, I could be focusing on work or doing something, and then a song will come on, or I sat next to an older Asian woman on the train who she walked and she had the same stature as my grandma, and I just started crying, you know what I mean? I think that there's reminders of, oh, this is making me think of my grandma. Oh wait, she's dead. Like, It's really not funny, is it? By the time this video comes out, it'll probably be a few weeks later, but I went home a few days after she had passed just to be with my family and help out with stuff and, you know, mourn together. You know, like I mentioned, my grandparents were living with us when she was battling cancer, and then my gonggong has his own, you know,